And I think there are a lot of people out there that love flying drones. They already have the equipment and they're thinking, well, shoot, the test isn't that hard. The 107 can be passed. It's not an expensive test. And if I did that, then I could make money with my drone.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 124. Want to build a successful drone-based business? Then you're going to love what today's guest has to share. Ken Haynes is an entrepreneur and co-founder of UAS Professional Pilots, a member-driven platform that helps professional pilots promote and grow their business, while providing information to clients looking to hire those pilots. Ken is a private pilot himself and ran his own successful drone-based business before creating UAS Professional Pilots. In this episode of the Drone Radio Show, Ken talks about UAS Professional Pilots and shares some of the things drone operators need to know to build a successful drone-based business. Now, before we hear from Ken, if you like the Drone Radio Show and you want to do a good thing, consider donating to my funding campaign on Patreon. For as little as $1 per month, you can help defray the cost of production and expand its offerings. You can join this effort and get some cool stuff by going to patreon.com/drone radio show. Now let's learn more about building a successful drone-based business with Ken Haynes. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Ken to introduce himself.
My name is Ken Haynes, and I'm with UAS Pro Pilots. UAS Pro Pilots is an organization that we developed to help qualified professional pilots promote their business and help them be successful in their businesses.
How long has UAS Professional Pilots been around?
We actually developed the idea several years ago and have switched it and made some changes, but ultimately we launched it a little bit over a month and a half ago.
So what makes UAS Professional Pilots different from other online platforms?
A lot of people think that we're a job sourcing board, like so many out there, and we're really not. We figured out that there's a real need in the industry for people to be taught how to fish, basically, instead of telling somebody how to go or, where to go fish. So the big thing is that not only are we trying to help our members succeed by teaching them some really valuable business information as it relates to the drone industry, one of the biggest challenges out there is understanding the value of hiring a professional pilot that's certified by the FAA, and a lot of people are doing it out there that aren't. So one of the huge benefits that we offer people is the ability to vet them independently so people know that they are qualified to do the work.
That sounds like an interesting concept because I know many drone operators are looking for more information on how to actually build a sustainable business.
We really identified that need, like I said, several years ago, because the point of entry into drone services is not out of reach for a lot of people. It's relatively inexpensive. There's certainly some great pilots out there, and we really wanted to help those people not only in the education of what you need, because it can be very confusing. The FAA standards are very confusing. It's very confusing from a liability standpoint for businesses to hire drones or businesses to do it in-house. And there's just so much non-information or bad information out there. We thought it was really important to make that part of our platform. And then in addition, to talk to the people and help them where they need the help. And you're right, a lot of startup drone companies or drone pilots are really struggling with trying to get that first client or get tons of clients.
What type of direction or assistance do you provide to answer those questions?
Part of our member benefit is that we have all this content available to them as members on the website. And, unfortunately, a drone business is just like every other business, right? There's a progression in what you do. You build your portfolio, you choose your equipment, you look at all your expenses, you figure your pricing, you go out and you get your clients, you figure out how to deliver that stuff. So it's a little more complicated than just saying, go take your drone, charge for it, and collect your money. So we've created an entire process where it's kind of like a checklist, but very detailed checklist, and the fact that there's content behind every piece of that to address whatever stage they happen to be at in their business.
Did some drone operators just jump into the business too quickly? Aren't these questions that they should have answered well before starting the business?
Yeah, certainly. And I think in a traditional business plan, that's absolutely right. And I think what makes this different is, like I said, the cost of entry into this market can be pretty small depending on the target market you're going after and the equipment that you want. And I think there are a lot of people out there that love flying drones. They already have the equipment and they're thinking, well, shoot, the test isn't that hard. The 107 can be passed. It's not an expensive test. And if I did that, then I could make money with my drone. And on top of that, I think a lot of people are doing it part-time. I've seen tons of people that are in the real estate world or any other full-time job that are going out on the side and getting it done and just saying, hey, I just happen to have a drone and I can make money at it. But again, it's not necessarily that easy.
Beyond becoming a good drone pilot, what do you think are the key areas that people need to master to become a successful business person?
Really, the key is dealing with the customer. Any business, you need customers to support the business. And so one of your biggest assets is how do you deal with customers? And that has to do with talking to them about your services, talking about your qualifications, addressing their particular needs, solving their problem and bringing value to them. A lot of this stuff can be taught, and that can too. But as far as I can show you how to deliver your product inexpensively, quickly, online, that's the easy stuff. But to go out there and actually be able to interface with a client and solve their problem is, I think, where a lot of these guys get stuck sometimes.
What advice do you give to someone on delivering good customer service? Because for many people, this may be the first time that they've run a service-oriented business.
It's definitely some trial and error if you've never done it before. And like I said, that's part of what we try to make videos about and try to coach them on, because a lot of times people just freeze. And if I can give you an example, if they go out there and do what they think they're supposed to do, and they have their marketing in place and they visit the offices of their potential clients and they drop promotional items, and then everybody has this thinking that once they see that they have a drone and can provide these great images, all of a sudden their phone's going to start ringing. And that's not really the reality of the situation. And to be able to talk to the client, and that's a lot of times what we tell people, somebody will call up and say, hey, I need 5 shots of this property done, or whatever the case is. What are you going to charge me? And most people will say, I'll charge you this much. And the phone call ends, and that's the end of it. We encourage people to really start a conversation, start the relationship with the client on the very first call. I never drop a price on somebody and then just let them leave my life. I tend to try to make that a conversation that I'm having with somebody that just happened to call me asking for information. And so I want to ask them about that job. I want to say, what's involved? Where is it? What are you trying to accomplish? Because a lot of times the client is asking for something that they think they want or they think they need, and actually there's a better solution out there. So we're trying to get to the point where we can solve the client's problem, and in doing so, talk to them like they're a relationship instead of a potential sale. And that seems to really help people kind of get to the next level when you say, can you give me the address of the job so that I can check the airspace? And once you have that and you pull it up on Google Maps and you say, okay, I see there's this around that, which may cause a problem for me, but I think I can work around it by doing this, and we can absolutely fly it from this side, and the sun's right at this time of day, so we can do that. And eventually you will get to price. But if you've established yourself and started building that relationship, you have a much better chance of delivering your price and having them say great when you've actually primed the pump a little bit with your qualifications, with your expertise, and with talking about how you're going to solve their problem.
What about choosing the markets to serve? Should people hone in on 1 or 2 markets or stay broad? What do you think?
I think people start out all the time trying to be as broad as they can. And we see a lot of people immediately getting into the real estate world. because I think it's an easy place to be. But there's a couple of schools of thought on that. If you stay as broad as you can, you're really not targeting a specific market, and you're casting a very broad net, and you may not be as good at one thing as you could be at others. So I usually start telling people, play to your strengths, then kind of assess that market. And I'll give you one more example. Years and years and years ago, when I got into the business, I started looking at it and saying, what is it that I want to do? And part of it was, where's the money? And what am I really good at? And I had a background in construction, and I also didn't have much of a background in video editing, and that's where a lot of people go. So I wanted to play to my strengths and kind of shy away from my weaknesses until I could develop my weaknesses into strengths. So one of my things was to go into the construction industry. The other reason that I wanted to do that is because in previous businesses that I'd had, I learned a lot about what kind of business model I would be looking at. Is it going to be volume of clients, or is it going to be volume of work? And when I land a construction company and they have 16 jobs running simultaneously that I get assigned to, that's a pretty big win. Whereas if I'm in another industry where I have to have 16 different clients to provide that same amount of work, then that's a whole nother avenue that I got to travel down to develop all these different relationships. So you have to touch a lot of people to get to the same place, depending on which model you're looking at.
There are a lot of people trying to create a drone-based business these days, which ultimately leads to increased competition. What advice or lessons can you impart to help operators understand how to deal with and manage competition?
I think it's important to know what the competition is and where they are in their process, just to know what the landscape that you're working within. And maybe that helps you determine your direction, but mostly I tell people, focus on your stuff. There's going to be competition no matter what business you're in, and the amount is definitely, especially at this time in the industry, is very specific to your location. In the United States, here where I live, one of my biggest challenges has not been my competition, but the education to my potential clients, because there isn't the competition out there breaking the ground. And so people actually don't know as much as I would like them to know about the drone business and what it can provide. So that's been a big marketing challenge when I started out in it, just to try to educate people as to what drones did. But I think it's important to know your competition, to know what they're offering and possibly their price structure. But I really don't promote that much either, because we have a whole series on pricing your drone services dependent on what you need and where you're located. And we think that's important, even weather, depending on where you live, how much can you fly, how much work can you actually get done, all goes into how to price your services. So just because the competition's charging $250 an hour doesn't mean you need to do it for $245 or $265. It's really an individual thing, but it does pay to know where your competition is and what they're doing.
This is pretty much a given, but can you comment on the importance for drone operators to put together a video of examples of their work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, drone work is kind of like artwork or photography or art, and people want to see what you do, especially if you're going for something that involves presentation pictures or video. So, in a previous lifetime, and I was trained as a graphic designer, and I owned a graphic design business for many years. And never would I walk into an office and have somebody say, hey, could I see your qualifications and why you're qualified to be a graphic designer? They wanted to see my portfolio. And I think more of the same is applicable to the drone business. People want to see what you can do. They want to see your successes. They want to see a portfolio. But unlike the graphic design world, I think it's really, really important too to pepper in your qualifications as far as your remote pilot certification and your insurance and your drone registration, as somebody that has a respect for the client and not putting them in a bad way by operating illegally. And I think that's a huge piece of the portfolio in addition to all the pretty work that you've done. But definitely I think that's what clients are looking for, is to see that you can do the work. And part of that is the qualifications.
And from what I can see, the bar seems to get higher and higher in terms of satisfying a client's needs. A few years ago, we were all going, wow, over a pan shot from a drone, because for many of us, that was the first time that we'd seen that. Fast forward to today, that same shot can draw a yawn. So operators have to be brutally honest with themselves on their work in terms of how competitive it is, because clients are always looking for that wow factor. Don't you agree?
I think you're right on track with that. And I think what's funny about the drone industry is the people that are getting into the drone industry are just as amazed at the video and the pictures and what the drone can produce as the potential clients are. And so a lot of times they're not critical enough of their work, and they may not have that understanding of how long should a video be, or, I've seen so much stuff out there with jerky motions and, like you're saying, kind of standard shots where you're like, well, there's nothing spectacular about that, but that's part of the learning process. And I do think that they need to be very critical of themselves. And I recommend that they go out and ask for critiques of their work, but I wouldn't do it in any of the standard groups out there on Facebook, or they're just going to get ripped up and not get really good, polished critiques.
Sure. And there are also resources in every community that operators can tap into, like local business people willing to act as mentors, local universities or community colleges where videography is taught, and professional meetup groups where they can get some unbiased input into their work.
Yeah, absolutely. And even, we have a member Facebook group that we only allow members into, and we monitor it very closely because we want people to have that avenue, because other drone pilots are great people to critique you because they see things that some other people wouldn't. And we kind of put that together as a safe space to be able to go in, ask questions, and critique your work without just getting torn to shreds as you do in so many groups on Facebook. But I think you're absolutely right. I think anybody that has an eye or experience for it could offer invaluable advice to somebody that would like a decent critique of their work.
Something that seems pretty basic, but sometimes overlooked by drone operators, is practice. Devoting regular and consistent time to practicing the techniques they need to master for their business.
And of course, it depends on what you're into. I mean, if you're doing real estate videos, or you're doing still shots, or you're doing mapping services, but you're right, practice all the time, because I don't know about you, but every time I go out, it seems like I learned something. For as much as I think I know, there's a whole bunch that I don't. And that may be if you're on a mapping mission, it may be getting into a remote place where all of a sudden your equipment's not working because you don't have an internet connection through your phone or through your tablet or your device. And all of a sudden that becomes a huge challenge to solve. So there's so much to learn no matter what part of the drone industry you're in, that I think practice is absolutely essential and should be done all the time.
How much should a drone operator practice? Is there a recommended benchmark or some sort of standard that you've heard of for drone videographers?
No, not really. Like I said, I could take it from a personal experience, and I never really wanted to get into the video side of it necessarily. It turns out I actually have a pretty good hand in video, but everybody learns at a different rate. So you and I may go out with the same drone and do the same amount of hours and have totally different results. So I don't necessarily put a benchmark on it, except for you should be delivering good product to your client, whatever that means. And back to our previous comment is, the client has to be thrilled with the stuff, got to think it's great value. And a good way to do that would be to get a critique from somebody before you deliver garbage.
And by the very nature of the business, drone operators that are consistently producing quality work and focusing on satisfying the customer will ultimately rise to the top. The market will reward good pilots and good business people.
Again, I think you're right on track. The drone industry, I think, has a lot of really unique things that are going on in it right now because it's so new. The 107 is now 1 year old. Before that, it was a 333 exemption. In terms of making it available to everybody that had a drone is a pretty new thing. And so I believe the market will reward the people that do great work. But since it's so new, since there's so many people getting into it, right now there's a ton of opportunity. And I think you're going to see a lot of short-term successes. And what you're talking about is a long-term success. And I think that those short-term successes will get weeded out, and those long-term successes will be based on the fact that the market is rewarding the people that are producing good stuff.
How does someone go about pricing their work for a job?
Like I said, I've got kind of a unique view on that. And if I live in Seattle, that may be very different than I live in Wyoming for a couple different reasons. Number one, the cost of living, and number two, the weather that you fly in. So generally, when we advise people on how to price their services, we tell them to kind of go out and figure out what it is they need as far as revenue. And we don't go into great detail because we have equipment costs and we have taxes and we have all sorts of different things to consider as far as gross revenue. And we don't necessarily address that specifically because that's more of an individual thing, how they're incorporated and all the details that go in with that. But once you discover that number, what you would like to make, then we think it's relatively easy to work backwards and figure out how many days of a week you can fly or how many weeks out of a month. And that can definitely be based on weather. We see that here in Colorado all the time. A lot of precipitation, cold temperatures, snow may really affect how many days we can actually have that thing in the air, and even the landscape. If you're out there providing that kind of video or those kind of pictures, and it gets pretty ugly around here where I live in the winter, so that could have an effect on it too. But once you figure out how often you can fly, how many jobs you need to fill that, then you can kind of work backwards into your pricing to get to somewhat of an hourly rate that you can kind of use as a base to go out and price those jobs.
They also have to consider the total time for the job, not just the flying time, right? I mean, they've got the time they dedicate to marketing and running the business, the time it takes to get to the site and talk to the client, and the post-production time, for example. Newcomers can get really excited about their first check until they factor in the time required by all of these other activities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a huge misunderstanding between workable hours and billable hours. And certainly, we kind of break it down when we're going into our pricing in terms of pre-flight planning and travel time, and then the actual flying time, and then the back-end procedures, delivery, invoicing. To your point, we have marketing, but everybody thinks it's great to be in their own business, which it is. You get to set your own hours, but it's not just a 40-hour week. Sometimes it's a heck of a lot more than that. And the big thing to know about that is your hours aren't always billable. That's the big difference between running a business or having a business and working at a business. You can only bill a certain number of hours. And so marketing is an overhead. It's something that you're not going to necessarily be able to put on your invoice, but you definitely have to work it into your pricing.
I know you primarily work with drone operators, but what advice do you give to clients in terms of hiring a drone professional?
My advice to the client is always, first and foremost, get somebody that's qualified. And it's a shame we're on radio because I have this great graphic that I created, and I call it my lawyer's path to revenue in the drone industry. And it basically shows people what the potential liabilities are with flying a drone, and then how it works through the system if you're not qualified, if you're not licensed, if you don't have insurance. And because drones are considered aircraft, that's the big piece that people don't understand, is that puts it in a different class. There's different considerations, but because you can pick one up at Walmart, nobody ever even really asked that question. So my biggest advice to potential clients is make sure you're hiring somebody that is licensed, that has insurance, and I'm not talking about hull insurance or drone insurance, I'm talking about liability insurance, and that their drone's registered with the FAA. In other words, make sure all their T's are crossed and their I's are dotted, because it could totally have an adverse effect if we had an incident. And that, for businesses, will usually far outweigh, a $10 variance in price between pilots.
One of the interesting quirks in the industry, at least to me, is that a person can get their Part 107 certificate, open a business, and solicit clients without actually ever demonstrating that they can fly a drone. Do you recommend to your members to log a certain number of hours so they can demonstrate to a client that they do have the expertise to do the work that they've been contracted to do?
Well, like I said, I mean, a lot of them are looking for the portfolio, and unfortunately, it's an uphill battle to let the client know what the potential downside is when you're not hiring somebody that's qualified. And generally, the people that are qualified have a certain amount of hours. You know, if they're really intelligent about it and they really know what they're doing, a lot of time those flight hours follow. But the reason I usually harp on the upside is because I'm trying to speak a language that the potential client understands. And it's hard to even get them engaged in talking about qualifications. But when I start talking about liability, that seems to spark their attention because now it affects them directly. And what we advise our pilots is have all your information ready, have your portfolio ready, but that's something else to work into the conversation. How much work have you done? How many hours do you have? You know, certainly that's part of the portfolio and part of the selling package. But we believe so firmly in the fact that they need to have themselves covered when hiring a drone pilot. We've actually made a 4-minute video through UAS Pro Pilots that tells people how to hire a drone pilot, which sounds absolutely ludicrous, but it's really important information for a potential client to have, because the last thing they want to do is hire somebody without insurance and then find themselves in a bad position.
You know, I hear stories of clients trying to play drone operators off each other when it comes to price, because obviously they're looking for the lowest price possible. And in many cases, the client really doesn't understand what goes into the business. How do you counsel your members on situations like this?
I think it's definitely something that they have to figure out on their own. But, you know, it's tough, especially when you're first getting in the industry, because you want that job and you almost need that job. And so you're willing to drop your price. And quite honestly, what we tell people is that the kind of client you want? If they're going to price shop you or negotiate with you on all the things that you're providing, I'm not saying that there's no room for flexibility in the negotiation, but if the guy's just going to lowball you, is that the guy you want to continue to work for? Or would you rather spend your time seeking out a client that actually will pay you what you're worth or what you're asking?
Yeah, I think that's really the key. It's much easier to deal with a client that appreciates your services and is willing to pay for them than it is to constantly being asked to renegotiate your fee. It makes for developing a much stronger business in the long run, and any referrals you get are already qualified at that rate. It's much, much better situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I mean, if I can build a relationship with a client and that relationship is based on my expertise and my deliverables and everything, basically me solving their problem every time I go on the job, I'm actually not going to be worried about them trying to price shop me, because that's the kind of client I want. I want to work for the most amount of money, and I don't want to be chasing a bunch of scratch.
What other things should someone be aware of as they start a drone-based business?
I think the biggest thing to be aware of, we kind of touched on, drones aren't magic. They're a great technology, but they're not magic in the fact that they sell themselves. The drone business is a business. And for guys that are getting into it, they need to approach it as such. And I think that's kind of the moment that a lot of these guys get to, is they have a drone, they walk into somebody's office and they announce their presence, and they're just another guy selling something. And even after you show the pictures and the video and people are like, uh-huh. So I think that's the biggest thing to know getting into the drone business is it doesn't sell itself. It's a business. You need a plan. You need an approach. You might need some help. But once you figure it out, it's a really satisfying business to be in. It's a lot of fun. We've done more work that we enjoyed and actually got the bill for it than I can count. It's the best job I've ever had.
We talked about a lot of things that people can do to build a successful business. But are there things that can sink a business, things that people should not do?
Yeah, everything that we just talked about in reverse. No, I think one of the big things that could sink a business is not keeping your eyes on the horizon and the future. One thing that I find in this business, and we all find, is that the technology is moving incredibly fast. And, you know, like I said, I came in with a little bit of a construction background and was trying to figure it out and looked at LiDAR systems and bigger equipment, and determined that there was no way that I would ever get my money out of some of the systems that I was looking at, and that was going to be a really poor investment. So I think to be smart about the business coming in, knowing that things are going to change tomorrow and the next day, and the FAA rules aren't necessarily locked and loaded all the way down. So there's a lot of variables in the industry right now, and I think the quickest way to sink your business is not being aware of the potential changes that are out there every single day.
I know your business is relatively new, but what do you think is most drawing people to the platform? Why are they there?
I think what's drawing them to our platform is the fact that there's help. There's actually light at the end of the tunnel. You know, I started this many years ago, had to figure out a 333 exemption, how to submit it, how to get qualified, and it was an incredible pain in the rear end, and there was no help out there. Everything was so new, and I think that is what is drawing them to our platform. Is there's actionable advice that is helping people run their businesses, and we have several like real highlight reels of our own where we've been able to give people advice that have literally changed their businesses from, you know, struggling to successful, or even getting the guy the first phone call where he's been marketing for 2 months, and we get on the phone with him for a half an hour, point him to a couple of videos, give him some advice, and in 2 days, he's saying, my phone rang. It's one of the biggest home builders in the area. They want to meet with me. And it's stuff like that, those stories that people are like, wow, so there is hope. And so that's why I think they're coming to the platform.
Is there a specific submarket or industry that your members seem to be targeting?
What I see mostly is people immediately come in and they say, we're going into real estate. And I think for a lot of people, that's pretty short-lived. Kind of goes back to your commentary about experience. And I think it's an easy market to get into. There's a lot of people out there that have homes for sale. We see it all the time. And I think it's just the easy solution. So I think most of the people gravitate towards real estate immediately. And when they get there, they find out some of the huge challenges that everybody else is also getting into the real estate industry. And they're wondering how to price their services because another guy's undercutting them. And then they figure out that there's a lot of real estate people that are actually doing it themselves, brokers with their own drones. And they figure out that it's not as easy as they think it is. So everybody has a path of progression, and we try to help them progress, even if they do want to start there. And there's nothing wrong with the real estate market. Don't get me wrong. We do plenty of work in it ourselves. But, you know, there are other avenues and other ways to go. And like I said, you know, you play to your strengths, and you look at the future and you see what's out there, and you kind of anticipate what's coming and where the technology is and what you have access to. And there's a whole nother world out there beyond usually what you come into the industry with, at least on the scale of, hey, I'm a solopreneur, I'm one guy, I got a drone, and I want to start a business.
Regarding the structure of the platform, how do people find the right information to progress them towards their goals?
We wanted to put a checklist on that for people. We wanted them to be able to go through the process because a lot of our members already have a website established. And then there's other guys that just have a 107 that don't have a website, don't have social media set up or anything. So what we figured out was everybody's in kind of a different place in the market. So we wanted a checklist that they could go through and say, I've done this and this and this. And what we ended up doing is designing the site so that we basically have put it into a couple of different sections, kind of like a class, kind of like a 101, 201, 301. And if you've already got the basics that are all here in 101, that serves as a great checklist to go through and watch those videos and get that information and say, oh, you know what, maybe I should go and update this, or I didn't do it like this, or I totally missed it. But then you get down to the other sections that are more advanced where people are stuck. And they say, well, I've got all this stuff done, and this is my sticking point. And then there's actionable information to take them beyond that point.
Is there a members area where people can share experiences and learn from each other?
That's mostly our Facebook group. You know, we could have put together a forum, and part of our thing is, you know, we've heard this from people like, well, I don't have a Facebook account. Well, if you're going to be a drone business, especially a small drone business, then you need to go get a Facebook account. There's so much opportunity in advertising avenues and just letting people know you're out there. You should have one of those. So we put together most of our stuff based on a Facebook platform now, but certainly we have a lot of other ways to communicate. That's the easy one.
Do you provide any market information to your members about industries or applications that might be more promising as a drone-based business?
Our platform is based on the business of drones, and there's a lot of guys out there that are way smarter than we are that can talk about the kind of drones you should fly and what's coming up in drones and those technologies. And we're not trying to be everything to all people, as you asked earlier about in another capacity, but we really are focused on this is business and this is how it applies to drones. So, we have our own local business here, and certainly we keep our eyes open for things that are opportunities in our specific markets, because that's the other thing is what's coming in your specific market. If you're focused in on construction, what should you be aware of? And that's kind of our approach on that.
What do you tell people about nurturing repeat business or bundling services or upselling techniques?
The world lives and dies on their phones and their computers these days, and especially social media. So I would give somebody advice as far as repeat customers and nurturing that. I would definitely recommend, if you've had a great experience with a client and you've got a good relationship with them, to reach out there and get them to review you on all your social media channels, because it looks great when somebody else pulls up a review on Google Business or Facebook. That can have a huge, huge impact on whether they're going to hire you or not. And that, again, goes beyond your pricing, but to your expertise and what you deliver. So that's a great way to nurture repeat business, or at least the client. And as far as repeat business, hopefully the relationship's good enough for them to call you whenever they have something. But it's also great to always be in contact with that client. And I'm not saying text them every day or call them every day, but definitely check in with them. It'd be great to have that on your calendar, where once a month or whatever it is, depending on your client, depending on your market, to be able to reach out to them and just say, hey, just touching base. Is there anything we can do for you?
And for my last question, Ken, what's the one quality that you think a person should have to create a successful drone-based business?
I think the best quality to have in the drone business is going to be the ability to figure it out. The industry is still new. People are still searching around, and I think people that are going to be very successful are going to take information that they can find, but they're not necessarily going to follow the same path somebody else. They're going to get out there and figure it out. No matter how hard it gets, no matter what the challenges are, they're going to figure it out. And those are the people that I think will be very successful, and the one thing that you really need to be a leader in the drone industry.
That's it for episode 124 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Ken Haynes of UAS Professional Pilots. I want to thank Ken for taking the time to speak with me and sharing his insights. If you want to learn more about UAS Professional Pilots or want to connect with Ken, check out the website at uaspropilots.com. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1 per month, you can help defray the costs of production. To donate, go to patreon.com/Drone Radio Show. Thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.